Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the In a Nutshell, the Big Ten podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowles, and today I'll be joined by Joe Mead. And you may have heard from us recently, but today we are going to preview week 2 for all the college football teams in the Big Ten. We've got every team playing at a conference this week, and Joe will start with my Indiana Hoosiers. They're hosting the Sycamores from Indiana State on Friday night at 7. Tough loss for Indiana at home to Ohio State week 1, but the Hoosiers have got to find a way to get a W here.
Yeah, Sean, and I think a W is pretty expected for Indiana. And the reason I mention that is because they're not going to find a lot of situations like that for a lot of this season, barring anything monumental. I would say they have been tested already, but I think getting tested by the Ohio State Buckeyes, who are often the stalwart of the conference, would be very unfair. It's probably more like a practice test the teachers give at the beginning of the unit to terrify their students. But I'm looking for Christian Turner in the running game, Jalen Lucas, and for some kind of clarity at quarterback between Taven Jackson and Brendan Sorsby. Obviously, Ohio State's defense is very talented, but if I'm Indiana, I'm not just looking for the victory. I'm looking for clarity on offense, for some kind of offensive game plan. And for all the flack Tom Allen gets, he is a decent defensive coach. So figuring out the offense this week is going to be the main message I'd give to the Hoosiers.
There is no line yet on here, at least what I can see, but ESPN is giving Indiana a 97.4% chance to win, and Indiana State did lose to Eastern Illinois 27 to nothing in week 1. So you'd think that after the first quarter, this thing's probably going to be over. And if it's anything else, then that's not a good sign for the Hoosiers. But the next game here on Friday night on ESPN2, Illinois will be heading down to Lawrence to play Kansas. Both teams are 1-0. Illinois, as we said, narrow win over Toledo on the last second field goal, and Kansas took care of Missouri State. But the quality on the field might not be so great in this one, but it should be a pretty tight game.
Yeah, for Illinois, I honestly look at this as a house money game. I think this has been a question that's been posed to me and Sean, and it's been a hot message in my account, which has been, what are some of these teams going to be tested? We'll get to some teams later who I thought have been tested already, but they're very far and few between. I consider this a house money test for Illinois. No one's expecting them to run the table, be a playoff contender. So this is a game they could lose with minimal consequence. And their next test shot is next week at home against Penn State. They come to Champaign. We'll preview that game more next week. But people remember the game 2 years ago against Penn State. Illinois gave them a lot of trouble. They ended up winning that 6-8 overtime game. I couldn't even tell you what period of overtime it was, but Illinois here, I just look to get some stability on defense. Kansas and Leipold are very good offensive game planners. So, maybe get some confidence in that defense and string some things along. And Altmaier, just looking for him to get more comfortable in that offense in game 2 as a starter. But I'm not going to preach that they have to win. In fact, I think they are 3-point dogs as we speak.
Yeah, they've got a good chance to win a road game against a power conference opponent, and you win that, and maybe a bowl becomes a realistic possibility when you start 2-0. But we'll turn the page to Saturday here, and we'll start noon kickoff on Big Ten Network. Ohio State hosts in-state foe Youngstown State. Not a line out on this one, but you would think it might be in the 30s or the 40s. Ohio State got their Big Ten win last week. They've got 2 out-of-conference tests at home. What more could you be looking here from Ohio State other than a lopsided win and hope nobody gets injured?
Yeah, Sean, I think you hit those two on the head. The last thing is going to be the low-hanging fruit elephant in the room, which is Kyle McCord or Devin Brown. Is one of them going to assert themselves to the extent you can while playing the Penguins of Youngstown State to a level that gives them hopefully some confidence and mainly their fan base confidence. Not taking shots at the Ohio State fan base, but it's a fan base that demands sometimes unrealistic expectations. You often hear Urban Meyer say that the requirements at Ohio State are to never lose a game, never lose to your rival, and be in or win the national championship every year, which, that's said half sarcastically, half realistically. So Ohio State, this is a game you have to stop the Penguins out, get the starters out, and the biggest thing is going to be finding clarity at that quarterback position. And we'll talk about Ohio State probably a little more of the Q&A session, but that's all I have for now.
So another noon kickoff here. Similar sort of story. This game should not be close. It's Delaware going to Happy Valley to play Penn State. That'll be on Peacock. It not much different story here for the Nittany Lions, right? Delaware is 1-0. They did beat Stony Brook pretty handily. They did score 37 points, so maybe you're looking, don't give up too many points if you're Penn State here, but there's no real anything that you can really take out of this one, in my opinion, with a couple of Big Ten matchups in weeks 3, 4, and 5.
No, absolutely not. Penn State, a little different from Ohio State since Drew Aller did play, by all accounts, a very good game against West Virginia. I would just emphasize for them to keep that going, maybe get some of their 3 and 4 running backs besides Allen and Singleton going. And then it would not shock me in the slightest if Penn State contradicted James Franklin's 1 week at a time policy, has started prepping for Illinois, a team that has given them fits. So, yeah, not too much else for the Nittany Lions, Sean.
And the next noon kickoff here, it'll be on Fox. Probably the most interesting Big Ten game this weekend. It's going to be Matt Rule's Nebraska heading to Boulder to take on Coach Prime's Colorado Buffaloes. This game became a whole lot tougher than it was just last week.
Yeah, Sean, this was a game a lot of people thought going into the year Nebraska would win, maybe not handily, but win semi-comfortably, maybe 10 to 14 points. But talk about two programs with two brand new head coaches going in two totally different directions, all be it in 1 week. Nebraska went from blowing that 7-point lead, going 1-0 in the conference on the road, and Colorado just went into Fort Worth and upset the reigning national runner-ups. And Colorado's only favored by 3, which I find a little surprising, but the way to victory for Nebraska is going to be capitalizing off stuffing the run like they did very well against Minnesota. They are going to have to get some more pressures on Shedeur Sanders, who is also very mobile, and they're going to have to contain those playmakers. Minnesota did not have many playmakers. Colorado has, I wouldn't say no shortage, but they have plenty more than Minnesota had. So for Nebraska, in a sold-out crowd, and I'm sure plenty of Nebraska fans will be there, it's going to be about keeping their composure. And, if there is a situation where they have the lead late, they finally have to finish. They have to break that narrative. And I can't underestimate how big a game this is for Nebraska, not in terms of, the overall picture of the program, but for bowl eligibility. They play Michigan at Michigan State and play a tough Maryland game for their crossovers. So they could potentially be staring 0-2 in the face. And, maybe they get to 2-2 after, but then they do play Michigan at home week 5 for their next big test. But we could look into those games later, but can't undersell how big a game this can be for Nebraska.
Nebraska did just give 1 touchdown up to Minnesota last game, but like you said, just of the week that we've seen, it looks like Colorado has a whole lot more weapons on their offense, and TCU, who was typically will play in high scoring games this year, did give up in the 40s to Colorado. So I think those will be one of those games where you can kind of figure out what's going on pretty quickly. And Nebraska's not much margin for error against a team like Colorado, I think. So the last noon kick here is Purdue, who had a tough loss to Fresno State week 1. They're going to Virginia Tech in the ACC. This is going to be a tough one for the Boilers, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was not the debut anyone wanted from Brian Walters, but I don't think anyone truly faults him based on what they lost. Virginia Tech, again, only favored by 3 points. I think Hudson Card has shown in the past at Texas that he's capable of commanding an offense, albeit he didn't do it as consistent as Texas. Otherwise, he would have probably still been the starter. But with all that said, all I'm looking for from Purdue is, going out there and keeping this semi-competitive. And luckily for them, they're 0-0 in the Big Ten West, Sean. It's kind of the same message for Illinois too, is maybe you obviously want to win the game, but if you string together momentum before it ultimately counts in the Big Ten, it's not the worst thing, especially for a first-year head coach.
This is going to be about their defense for me. I mean, 487 yards given up to a team like Fresno State, that just can't happen. And it doesn't matter really how good of an offense you have. So we'll see. I think Virginia Tech will probably win this one, but like you said, it doesn't really change the picture for Purdue in the Big Ten, even if they do start 0-2. So next kickoff here at 3:30 on CBS. Joe, the UNLV Running Rebels are headed up to Ann Arbor to play Michigan. Game 2 of 3 of a relatively easy start for the Wolverines. What are you looking for in this one?
Biggest thing Michigan's been criticized on is their offensive line and by some people getting pressure on the quarterback. Although I argue in an Instagram post that will be released today or tomorrow, depending on when you listen to this, that it wasn't that big a deal since ECU got the ball out very quick. With all that said, UNLV has a significantly worse run defense, so look for Michigan to try to establish the run game more, and they have been rotating offensive linemen in and out, trying to find which combination would be the best so they could repeat the Joe Moore Award for best offensive line. But I would just look for kind of the same theme for Penn State. Continue the groove for McCarthy, uh, establish the run game, get some pressure, and then get the starters out of there where that thing's out of hand.
So the other 3:30 kickoff on Fox is the Cyhawk game between Iowa State and Iowa. Both teams did win in Week 1. It is in Ames at the home of the Big 12 team. They took care of Northern Iowa Week 1, and as we talked about, Iowa beat Utah State. So Iowa, they had some solid quarterback play last week, at least better than what they've experienced last year and the years coming up. But what do they have to do to get something from this game?
Yeah, this is a huge rivalry game, and Iowa's really dominated this rivalry really over the past decade. Matt Campbell has a Kirk Ferentz problem, and no one can tell me otherwise. Just look up his record versus Iowa, which I'm confirming right now is, yeah, it's not great. So the biggest thing I would emphasize for the Hawkeyes is they need to get more protection for Cade McNamara. He was 17 to 30 last week. Didn't have the greatest QBR, but for anyone who watched the highlights or watched the game itself, they had to realize Cade was under a lot of pressure, especially when the running game was not going the way it should. But Iowa is going to be very stingy on defense. Iowa is favored by 4 points, and one thing Cade did very well was distribute the ball to different receivers. So Iowa State really can't center in on one guy to defend, and I think Iowa needs to use that to their advantage. And I would guarantee you they were holding a lot back for this big rivalry game on Fox.
So next 3:30 kick on BTN. Richmond going to East Lansing to play Michigan State. Shouldn't be much in this one for the Spartans.
No, I think if Richmond, who's 0-1, comes into East Lansing and makes it semi close the way Central Michigan kind of did, I think Michigan State's going to have big problems as their first test, which we'll touch on later, is going to be when they play at home to Washington, who's a top 10 team and probably one of the best passing offenses in all of college football. So for Michigan State, I'm just looking for them to get Kim more comfortable, and then hopefully the secondary gets tested a little. And by tested, I mean get some confidence because when you're staring Washington dead in the face at home, when you have a 10-year anniversary for the Rose Bowl victory in 2013 for the Spartans, um, that's a game. I'm not saying the Washington game they have to win, but that's a game you have to make semi-competitive in front of a home crowd on a Saturday evening in early September.
Yeah, they're gonna. Nobody's gonna be really surprised about the scoreline Week 1 for Michigan State, as it looked kind of out of hand. But as we said yesterday, that was kind of a close game for 3 quarters. So you'd think they'll be ready in the first quarter in this one and take it to Richmond. Next 3:30 kick, UTEP heads to Northwestern. UTEP has already played 2 games. They lost Jacksonville State and they beat Incarnate Word. And Northwestern 0-1, a tough loss on the road at Rutgers. Not much going offensively for the Wildcats. And UTEP averages almost 400 yards a game. So, Joe, is there any way that Northwestern can not go 0-2 here?
I think the way they have to do it is they have to get not even consistency. They have to consistency going. They have to get some kind of rhythm for the offense, which they really failed to find. The one touchdown they did score was at the end of regulation, and it was when Rutgers frankly quit and was already in the locker room celebrating. So they were trying to get AJ Henning, the former Michigan receiver, involved with Bryant, who did win his fair share of games at Cincinnati. But for Northwestern, I would just say get the ball to your playmakers, figure out who they are if you have any, and give them the ball. And while it sounds like a flag football scouting report I'm giving, that's kind of what Northwestern's season has been diminished to. And Sean, I hate to be this guy, but Northwestern does play at Duke next, and you know, home games against non-Power 5 teams. They do play Howard October 7th, but should they lose this game, they really risk being one of the only Big Ten teams to go winless. I think the last team to do that was Illinois, who was 0-11 in 1997, and Northwestern would be the first team to go 0-12. A lot of people have thrown that out there that they could be. I'm not going to throw a prediction out for this game quite yet, but yeah, they could be staring that dead in the face if this one gets ugly or they lose it.
If you look at the schedule and you don't get this one, I mean, what other game is there to get if there's not this one? So UTEP is favored 1.5 points, but Northwestern going through a lot of issues right now. I think they could really use a W, even if it doesn't really mean anything in the long run. So fast forward to 7:30 on Saturday, ABC. One of the more competitive games in the conference. Number 19, Wisconsin goes to Washington State. This should be a pretty good game. Wisconsin is favored by just less than a touchdown right now. Both teams are 1-0. Washington State beat Colorado State 50-24 in Week 1, and Wisconsin beat Buffalo 38-17. Both teams over 500 yards in their first game, so there's a chance that points can be put up in this one.
Yes, Sean, and frankly, I'm going to have to do it now. If I was going to put any Big Ten team on upset alert, it would have to be Wisconsin, if we could even consider anything Week 2 an upset. It's not a matter of Wisconsin not impressing me. I was very impressed with the running backs and Allen and Malusi and even Mordecai's performance, but there's just a trend of Big Ten teams going out west in the beginning of the year, playing these night games, and just being left out to die, whether that's the time change or any other factors. I can't quite pinpoint it, but you look at Michigan State over the past few meetings, they've brought some very good teams to games out west, at Oregon or at Washington. Well, maybe not last year's at Washington, but Wisconsin, from a non-win standpoint, I think if they continue this balance, that's a very good sign. And frankly, if they continue this balance, I don't see a way they lose this game. But finding balance on the road in a tough environment and a crowd that's going to be very hyped up. If those don't know, Washington State is not in a Power 4 conference in the next coming years. So this might be a us versus the world kind of vibe for Washington State. So, look for them to play inspired and look for them to make Wisconsin the maybe the scapegoat for all their issues and take it to them. But if you were to put a gun to my head right now, I think Washington State may pull this one off and give Wisconsin a lot of questions.
So 2 more 7:30 kickoffs here. Shouldn't really be competitive games at all. That's Charlotte at Maryland and Eastern Michigan at Minnesota. Joe, is there any way that the Big Ten teams don't come up on top in these two?
Of the 3, actually, Temple goes to Rutgers, but of those 3, I think the only intriguing one, even worth mentioning, Sean, is Charlotte going to Maryland, simply because Charlotte has a lot of ex-Michigan and a lot of ex-Power 5 guys from the DMV area, I might add, since their head coach is Biff Boji, who was the longtime coach at St. Francis Academy, which is just a powerhouse and factory for guys in college football like Blake Corum and Nikhai Hill-Green, who is on Charlotte right now. But Charlotte, a lot of talent. It's going to be a very tough game for them. They are 24.5 point dogs. They do have a chip on their shoulder. I look for them to make this semi-competitive, but I think Maryland's excess of talent compared to Charlotte will take over. But if there was any game I'd pinpoint, I would just say that one.
Yeah, all three of those Big Ten teams, Joe, are 1-0, and really should be 2-0 after this week. And they weren't supposed to be at the top of the conference, so every W counts, especially if you want to make a bowl, which for all three of those teams would be a pretty solid season. So that's all of the football games for the Big Ten. We got 2 Friday and then the rest on Saturday. So our Week 2 recap will probably come either Sunday or Monday. No more of these Sunday and Monday college football games, at least until Thanksgiving week. But we'll wrap up the Week 2 preview, Joe, and then I think we got some mailbag questions.
Absolutely. I'm pulling them up right now. And, I believe the first one is a very good question for Sean, a basketball one. I'm assuming this comes from an Indiana fan. Sean, what Indiana basketball game, non-conference of course, are you most excited for this coming November and December?
That's a good question. Obviously, a couple different, as we've talked about before, no Crossroads game, no Big Ten ACC Challenge. So a couple different. It's going to be a little bit of a different year for Indiana and the rest of the Big Ten teams if you think about that. But the UConn game in New York City has to be the big one. Obviously, the national champions from last year and at the Mecca of College Hoops at MSG. I'll probably be there for that one. It's got to be that one. Great opportunity early on in the season for a W. Not playing in the Gavitt games this year, and then they'll get the winner or loser of Texas Louisville after UConn, and then they get Auburn in Atlanta, I believe, for the holiday hoopsgiving thing. So those are a couple, and as we'll get to in the college hoop season, but those are, nobody cares if you get beat by 40, but if you are able to pick one of those big wins up, those could carry your tournament resume come March.
Absolutely. And then, wasn't directed toward me, but I'll give you two games early in the season. I would look at, if you're a Michigander like myself, the first one is the Champions Classic. Michigan State, who has a bevy of expectations, which again we will talk about in a future cast going into this year. They played Duke at the United Center. Can't think of hard to think of much better brand names going at it than those two. And then the night before, Michigan plays St. John's at Madison Square Garden, a game I will drag Sean to whether he wants to or not. So
No,
we'll get off basketball for a second and we'll go to football. This one's addressed towards me, and Sean, you can jump in if you want. Joe, when do you see the Big Ten East dark horses getting tested? So I'm assuming he would mean Penn State, Michigan State. And you know what? I'll give you the answers to all top four of the the traditional contenders or teams who've won it in the past. I honestly think Michigan, based on their schedule, will likely not be tested until either the game at East Lansing on October 21st or really the game at Penn State November 11th, which is kind of shocking to think that you wouldn't even be potentially tested till middle October. For Ohio State, it's crystal clear where you're going to be tested. It's going to be week 4 at Notre Dame, a primetime game. Can't think of a bigger game that week in college football. I think the whole country will be tuned into that, neutral or whatever. Penn State, I've mentioned this several times on this cast. I do think Illinois for Big Noon kickoff next week does give you, I'm not saying you're going to lose. I'm saying it's a very good test for Drew Aller and a relatively young team going in there versus a Big Ten veteran and former Big Ten championship winning coach like Brett Bielema. And then for Michigan State, I reserve the right to change this. I do think Washington as a test is a very unfair statement considering their offense. But if you look at Michigan State's schedule, they do play 4 of the top 10 teams in the country. So, if you do fail the test versus Washington, maybe it's not the end of the world. But if you fail to a degree where Washington's throwing all over you and it looks like a repeat of 21 and 22 when Ohio State passed all over you, I think some questions are going to arise, and Michigan State, they have to put on a decent enough showing in that game. But we will talk about more on that next week. To Joe and Sean. Oh, Sean, I'm gonna have to put you on the spot for this. Joe, you've often predicted Urban Meyer going to Texas for college football. Sean and Joe, do you project any crazy coaching hires in the Big Ten for football or basketball in the near future?
Crazy.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I think for something to be crazy like that, I think there'd have to be kind of an or a unforeseen departure in one of the big programs, and then say a Penn State became open, then they could have pretty much their pick of any coach in the country minus 5 or 6. But basketball wise, a couple hot seats, maybe in Ohio State becomes open in basketball, then you could pull somebody big in there. But it's early in the season and football and basketball hasn't even started yet, so we're not getting those rumors quite yet, like we did last year with Rick Pitino seemingly becoming the St. John's coach in January. None of that yet, but at least in my opinion, it would have to be a big program having an opening, and then they get a big name.
Oh, so you're dodging the question, Sean?
Yep.
Yeah. I will humor our viewers because I think it's a very question that can be forgiving if you give a crazy answer, but if it comes true, you look like a genius. I could say that I'll throw two out there. If Penn State underperforms, whatever that means, I'm not saying James Franklin gets fired, but he has in the past looked at other opportunities. Does Penn State look at Matt Campbell or another Midwestern guy, like maybe even a Mark Stoops, to come in to replace him? Maybe not blockbuster hires, but definitely a possibility. And the last one I will throw out there is Ryan Day at Ohio State has had pretty much nothing but success, been to the playoff 3 of his 4 years there. But the NFL, he came from the NFL. Sean, he's an NFL guy, I think, at heart. And, Columbus, Ohio is not a place with reasonable expectations, as I've mentioned earlier. If he does leave, Ohio State football is probably a top 3, 4 job in college football, and that would attract top 3 or 4 names in all of football. Wouldn't be shocking to me to see a homeboy like Luke Fickle or Variable jump at the opportunity, but maybe they even go. I'll throw one crazy name out there, theory. What if they go after Marcus Freeman? If Notre Dame does very well this year, and Marcus Freeman has to walk back his comments he made about Ohio State's academic rigor, which, believe me and Sean do not care about on this podcast. You know, there's a lot of possibilities for that job, but those are just a few theories I will throw out there.
And any for basketball, Joe?
I think that pretty much wraps up for. We only got three for today, since we were between shows, but do send in more questions. I know this is just the start of it, and we will answer questions for as long as you send them in, guys.
So we'll see you either Sunday or Monday for the Week 2 recap, and then a couple days after that for the Week 3 preview. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out the content on the website, on the Instagram accounts, and on any other social media platforms. This podcast will be on YouTube and Spotify. It doesn't matter how you listen to it. Either way counts for us. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.